Hello and welcome back to the Lit Cave. My name is Brian, and I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk to you about my favorite things that I read in the year 2014. Uh, I wanted to try and limit it down to 14 books, and I've sort of done that, but I will say that I've combined a few of my choices into like a whole series is combined as one choice. So it does give me the opportunity to read a few more than 14 books. Normally what I would do is I would lift up the book for you to see, but I've got a sick little guy sleeping in the next room, and so I've been giving him a little bit of extra attention, and I didn't want to have to deal with picking up and putting away the books. So I will try to flash the books here on the screen. Last time I said I would do that, I completely forgot to put the book on the screen, so if I forget, I do apologize. I'm not going to reshoot or re-edit the video, but I will add links to the books, hopefully, in the doobly-doo down below. So, here are some of my favorite things that I read in the year 2014. The first thing that I want to mention is The Silkworm by Robert Galbraith. So, The Silkworm is the second book that J.K. Rowling wrote under the pseudonym of Robert Galbraith, and it is the second one of the Cormoran Strike detective mysteries, or detective fiction or mystery novels. And I really love both of them. I'm really excited to hear that BBC is turning them into a TV show or a miniseries or whatever. I can't wait to see them. Hopefully they'll be fantastic. But yeah, so The Silkworm I loved, and I look forward to the third book. I know that J.K. Rowling has said she's got at least 7 planned, so I can't wait to keep reading those. The next book I'm going to mention, I've mentioned in a bunch of videos. It's something I read pretty recently, but it's a collection of short stories by a bunch of young adult authors that is focusing on the holiday season, called My True Love Gave to Me. It's edited by Stephanie Perkins, and it was a fantastic short story collection. I found some authors that I really liked. In fact, I've ordered my first personal copy of a Matt De La Pena book as a result of reading his short story in that book. So I really enjoyed that, and it'll be something that I'll probably read every holiday season now. Okay, the next thing that I want to mention, We Were Liars. Very hard for this book not to come up in a video about 2014. It got tons and tons of recognition. Some people might argue that it's a little overhyped. I really liked it, though. I thought it was a great book. I thought it was really well written. I thought the twist was a little different than I expected it to be. But it was a fun read, and it was a really quick read, so it wasn't like a book that you invested a tons of time in before you decided what you thought of it. It was good overall. So that is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to mention is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. So I read a lot of Rainbow Rowell this year. I read Eleanor and Park, Fangirl, and Landline, which only leaves me to read Attachments by her. And out of everything I've read so far, Eleanor and Park is by far my favorite book. Eleanor and Park is a book that is beautiful, the way that it depicts these two people kind of falling in love when they have almost nothing in common at first. Two people kind of stepping outside of who they are in order to fall in love, and dealing with some difficult situations in their lives. It is not a fairy tale, happy ending kind of love story. It is a deeply painful story that only makes the love more powerful and more rich and warm. So I loved Eleanor and Park, and I'd say it would be difficult for Rainbow Rowell to write something that I like more than that. It was a really fantastic book. Okay, the next thing I'm going to mention is a book called Think Differently, Live Differently by Bob Hamp. So Think Differently, Live Differently is very different from every other book on this list. Most of the books that are on this list are fiction. Think Differently, Live Differently is nonfiction. Think Differently, Live Differently is a Christian book by a man named Bob Hamp, who used to be on staff at my church. I don't believe he's on staff at my church anymore, but it's kind of hard to tell. I go to a really big church with a lot of people on staff. But Think Differently, Live Differently deals with how our thought patterns can be detrimental to our spiritual walks, our walks with God. And out of all the Christian books I've read in almost 20 years of being a Christian, Think Differently, Live Differently has really significantly changed my perspective on my faith and on the way that I think about things. So it's definitely going to be in like my top books about my faith probably ever. So it's a really, really good book. I highly recommend it. Okay, now the next several things I'm going to talk about are book series. I read a lot of book series this year, and some of them I liked quite a bit. So let's start by me talking about the Vampire Academy series. The Vampire Academy series overall, I'd probably give 4 stars to. I really, really liked them. The first book was probably one of my least favorite, and then maybe the 4th book would be right behind that. But for the most part, as the books progressed, I really, really came to like them more and more and more. And by the end of the book series, I tore through the last 2 books. I just had to know what was going to happen. And the last 2 books were kind of really more like one giant book that had been split. So I really recommend the Vampire Academy series. One thing that I've got set on my list to read this next year is the Bloodline series, which is sort of a companion series to the Vampire Academy. So I'm really eager to read the Bloodline series as well. So the Vampire Academy series definitely makes it on that list. Another one I want to talk about is the If I Stay duology. I read both of those this year. So that's If I Stay and Where She Went. And If I Stay was a fantastic book. I read both of them far before I saw the movie If I Stay. But If I Stay was a really good book. It was definitely a book you cry a lot of the way through. And it deals with, again, kind of like Eleanor Park, just an incredibly difficult situation, and how does love persevere through that. And I feel like you kind of have to listen to Death Cab for Cutie's song, What Sarah Said, on repeat while you read through If I Stay. But it's a great book. I didn't know what to expect of Where She Went. I didn't think there was any way it could beat If I Stay, and I thought it would be kind of weird to have a sequel to it in some ways, even though there was kind of you were kind of left at the end of If I Stay not knowing what was necessarily going to happen. And that's sort of a spoiler, but not really. So, sorry. But Where She Went, I liked so much more than If I Stay. I was really surprised by it. It's definitely my favorite out of the 2. And I will definitely read more Gail Forman after having read those 2 books. I was really, really, just really enjoyed them. So, okay, the next set of books that I'm going to talk about is it's an individual book, but it kind of finished out a series, so you can kind of count it all as one. But that is City of Heavenly Fire. So I finished the Mortal Instruments series this year. I can't honestly remember how many of them I read this year and how many I'd read in previous years, but I definitely read City of Heavenly Fire this year, and I think I read at least the last 3 this year. And I loved the Mortal Instruments series. Book 4 was probably the hardest for me to get into, but I really, really enjoyed the whole series, and again, it was one of those series that by the time you get to book 7, you're tearing through it. I mean, 700-something page book, I think, and I read it in just a couple of days. It was so, so, so good and so hard to put down, so I really can't recommend it enough. And then, in addition to that, another series of books by Cassandra Clare is the Infernal Devices series, and I read the entire trilogy this year and loved it from start to finish. So, 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 so good, so beautiful, so intense, so well written. And I cannot wait to continue reading Cassandra Clare's books as she puts out more series here in the future. So that's both City of Heavenly Fire and the Infernal Devices series. Just unbelievably good. Okay, the next book that I'm going to mention is another series. I'm going to talk about the Throne of Glass series. I have been debating whether I wanted to do a series wrap-up of this book, but I haven't finished the series because the series isn't done coming out yet. But I cannot, oh my goodness, I'm going to talk about them in my December wrap-up. But I started reading these during December. I read all 4 books in December, and I am in love. Like, this is possibly my favorite series out right now. It's by Sarah J. Maas, I believe is how she pronounces it, even though everyone else pronounces it Moss. I'll have to double check, and I'm not going to correct this, so I don't know what to say if I'm wrong. But Sarah J. Maas wrote it, and so good. There's 3 books in the series so far. There's Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire, as well as a bind-up of some prequel novellas called The Assassin's Blade, and they're so good. So good. If you like fantasy, like Game of Thrones and stuff like that, it's one of the things it's likened to is Game of Thrones. I think it is political in the way that Game of Thrones is political. Now, I haven't read Game of Thrones. I just know about them, and I've seen some of the show. But I think it's political in the way that Game of Thrones is political, but it's got more fantasy elements than at least the TV show Game of Thrones has. So I really enjoy it, and I will be standing in line to buy every book as they come out from now on from that series. It is probably my favorite new series. And that leaves me with only 2 things that I have not mentioned. And these are my top 2 books of the year. And ironically, neither of them is young adult fiction or fantasy, which tends to be the genre I'm most frequently drawn to. And these books are All the Light I Cannot See, or All the Light We Cannot See, excuse me, All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. So they would be number 2 and number 1, respectively, with The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry being my absolute favorite book of the year. So, All the Light We Cannot See is historical fiction set during World War II. It follows 2 different perspectives. One of them is a young boy who is eager to become basically an electrical engineer. He loves electronics and how they function, and all he wants is to learn how to do that and to get out of the orphanage that he's been raised in. But a young blind girl being raised in France, and eventually their paths cross. I had heard this so many times leading up to it, and their paths did not cross as powerfully as I had expected, but it was still beautiful. It was still well written. All the Light We Cannot See has some of the best writing I've ever read in my life. Pages of that book were like the most beautiful poetry you've ever read, but in prose form. Just remarkably well written. So I can't say enough about that book. Every single person needs to buy that book and read it. And then the other one, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. Very short book, very quick read. So good. All the way through the book, I found myself smiling and touched and just transported by the beauty of that book as well. All the Light We Cannot See is phenomenal, and The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, both of those are in my new all-time favorites, and I will read them over and over again. I highly recommend them. So that's like my top 14 of 2014. Granted, some of them are full book series, but I highly recommend that if you haven't picked up some of these that you do, because they're so worth it. And anyway, let me know what you read in 2014. Leave comments down below and let me know what really impacted you and what I should read, or which of the books that I read that really were your favorites as well. And here's looking forward to 2015 and all the great things we're going to read then. Until the next video, which will probably be in the next day or so, see you same lit time, same lit channel.